What you're about to hear will make you question everything you know about business success and the true cost of arrogance. The mahogany conference table reflected the faces of 12 board members, each one wearing an expression somewhere between disbelief and horror. At the head of the table sat Marcus Chen, 32 years old, his Armani suit impeccable, his confidence unwavering even as the numbers on the screen behind him painted a catastrophic picture. $800 million. That's how much his company, Tech Vision Industries, had hemorrhaged in just 18 months. But let me take you back to where this all began. 2 years earlier, when Marcus was the golden boy of Silicon Valley. Harvard MBA at 25, youngest VP at Goldman Sachs by 28, and by 30, he had raised $200 million in venture capital for his revolutionary AI startup. The tech press called him the next Steve Jobs. Forbes had him on their cover with the headline, "The Prodigy Who Will Reshape Tomorrow." Marcus believed every word of it. Why wouldn't he? Everything he touched turned to gold. When he walked into a room, seasoned executives twice his age hung on his every word. He had memorized every business theory, could quote Porter's 5 forces in his sleep, and his financial models were works of art. But there was one thing Marcus believed above all else. Experience was overrated and overpriced. Why would I pay someone $300,000 a year just because they have 20 years of experience? Marcus would say to anyone who'd listen. 20 years of doing things the old way? No thanks. Give me hungry graduates at 70,000 who think outside the box. This philosophy became his religion. When building TechVision's team, Marcus deliberately avoided hiring anyone over 35. His recruitment presentations at top universities became legendary. "We don't want your professors," he'd tell packed auditoriums of students. "We want you, fresh minds, unburdened by the failures of previous generations." The strategy seemed brilliant at first. TechVision's offices in Palo Alto buzzed with energy. Beanbags replaced boardrooms, ping-pong tables sat next to trading desks, and the average age of employees was 26. Marcus had hired 150 of the brightest young minds from MIT, Stanford, and Caltech. They worked 18-hour days fueled by energy drinks and the promise of stock options that would make them millionaires. The company's flagship product was an AI-powered supply chain management system called Nexus Flow. In demos, it was spectacular. The interface was beautiful, the technology cutting edge, and the pitch deck could make venture capitalists weep with joy. Marcus personally oversaw every aspect, trusting his young team to execute his vision perfectly. But there were warning signs that Marcus chose to ignore. When Sarah Mitchell, a 55-year-old supply chain expert with 30 years at IBM, applied for a consulting role, Marcus dismissed her resume without reading past the graduation date. 1978? She probably still uses a fax machine. He laughed to his hiring manager, Jake, who was all of 24. When Robert Thornton, former CTO of a Fortune 500 company, offered to review their architecture for free, Marcus declined. "Free advice is worth what you pay for it," he said. Besides, his last company took 5 years to implement what we're building in 5 months. The product launched on a Tuesday in September. Marcus stood in front of 200 journalists and investors, demonstrating Nexus Flow's capabilities. The AI predicted supply chain disruptions, optimized routes in real time, and promised to save companies millions. Orders started pouring in. Walmart wanted a pilot program. Amazon was interested. FedEx scheduled meetings. Within 3 weeks, TechVision had signed contracts worth $400 million. Marcus's net worth on paper reached $2 billion. The champagne flowed, the bonuses were distributed, and Marcus gave a company-wide speech about how they had proved that innovation beats experience every time. But while Marcus celebrated, something was happening in the depths of Nexus Flow's code that none of his brilliant young minds had anticipated. If you've ever witnessed how arrogance can destroy success, leave a like right now and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. The truth about what happened next will leave you speechless. The first crack in Marcus's empire appeared at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday, and it started with a single phone call. Marcus was asleep in his penthouse apartment overlooking San Francisco Bay when his phone exploded with notifications. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens, then hundreds. His personal cell, his work phone, even his tablet were lighting up like Times Square. The first call he answered was from David Kim, his 25-year-old head of customer success, and David was panicking. "Marcus, we have a situation." Walmart's entire East Coast distribution network is down. Nexus Flow it's doing something weird. It's routing all shipments to stores that don't exist. Marcus sat up, his mind immediately racing through possibilities. That's impossible. We tested this system for 6 months. What do you mean stores that don't exist? David's voice cracked. The AI is creating phantom locations. It's sending 18-wheelers full of merchandise to empty lots, closed stores from 10 years ago, even residential addresses. Walmart has 700 trucks currently driving to nowhere. By the time Marcus reached the office at 4:30 a.m., the situation had escalated beyond his worst nightmares. The war room, a glass-walled conference space with 20 monitors, showed a real-time map of chaos. Red dots, each representing a lost shipment, covered the United States like a rash. But Walmart wasn't the only problem. 3 more clients had reported critical failures. Target's inventory system was ordering products that hadn't existed for years. Best Buy's Nexus Flow installation had somehow interconnected with their payment system and was randomly refunding purchases from 6 months ago. Every refresh of the screen brought new disasters. Marcus's team of young geniuses sat at their computers, fingers flying across keyboards, but their faces told a different story. They were in over their heads. These weren't bugs you learned to fix in a Stanford computer science class. These were the kinds of systemic failures that required something no algorithm could provide: experience with real-world chaos. How did this pass testing? Marcus demanded, pacing behind his lead engineer, Tommy Wu, a 26-year-old prodigy who'd won every hackathon from here to Boston. Tommy didn't look up from his screen. It worked perfectly in testing, but the test environments were clean, controlled. We never tested it with legacy systems with dirty data from decades of different platforms. Why not? Marcus's voice was rising. Because, Tommy hesitated. Because we didn't know we needed to. None of us have ever worked with systems that old. It was 5:15 a.m. when Marcus received the call that would haunt him forever. Jim Patterson, Walmart's chief operations officer, a man who'd been in supply chain management since before Marcus was born, spoke with the kind of controlled fury that only comes from decades of experience. Chen, I've got $200 million of merchandise in limbo. I've got stores with empty shelves and warehouses backing up. I've got drivers who've been on the road for 10 hours looking for destinations that don't exist. But most importantly, I've got a clause in our contract that makes you liable for every penny of losses caused by system failure. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Jim, we can fix this. Give us 24 hours. 24 hours? Patterson laughed, but there was no humor in it. Son, you clearly don't understand what you've done. This isn't a software glitch. You've broken a supply chain that feeds 30 million people. Every hour this continues costs us $12 million. You don't have 24 hours. You have 2. After Patterson hung up, Marcus turned to his team. These brilliant kids who'd been so confident just weeks ago now looked like exactly what they were. Children who'd been playing with toys they didn't understand. The chief architect, Priya Patel, 27 years old with 2 master's degrees, was crying at her desk. The database administrator, fresh from Carnegie Mellon, had been staring at the same screen for 30 minutes, paralyzed. Marcus made a decision that went against everything he believed in. He picked up his phone and scrolled through LinkedIn until he found her. Sarah Mitchell, the 55-year-old supply chain expert he'd dismissed months ago. His thumb hovered over the call button. His pride screamed at him to find another way. But as another alert came in, this time from Amazon threatening immediate contract termination, he pressed call. Sarah answered on the 3rd ring. Mr. Chen, it's 5:30 in the morning. Ms. Mitchell, I need your help. I'll pay whatever you want. Consultant fees, equity, anything. There was a pause. I know what's happening, Mr. Chen. It's all over the industry forums. You've got a cascade failure caused by edge case handling and legacy system integration. Your young team built for tomorrow, but forgot that tomorrow has to talk to yesterday. Can you fix it? I can, but not alone. I'll need Robert Thornton for the architecture side, and at least 5 more experts who've handled similar migrations. Real experts, Mr. Chen, not children with degrees. Marcus swallowed his pride like broken glass. How much? For the team I need? Emergency rates? About $3 million for the week, plus damages liability protection. $3 million for 1 week. Marcus's entire annual salary budget for 40 employees. But as another monitor lit up with critical failures, he knew he had no choice. What Sarah Mitchell did in the next 6 hours would save some of TechVision, but the price of Marcus's arrogance was just beginning to compound. By sunrise, Sarah Mitchell had transformed TechVision's chaotic war room into something Marcus had never seen in his company. Organized, methodical professionalism. Sarah arrived at 6:15 a.m. wearing a simple blazer and jeans, pulling a small, wheeled suitcase behind her. She didn't match the hoodies and sneakers uniform of TechVision, but when she walked in, something in the room changed. The panicking kids seemed to unconsciously straighten their spines. Here was an adult, finally. Behind her came her team. Robert Thornton, 62, former CTO with gray hair and hands that had built systems before the internet existed. Maria Santos, 48, who'd saved Target's infrastructure during the 2013 breach. James Park, 51, whose LinkedIn simply said, "I fix things." Each one cost more per hour than Marcus's employees made in a month. Sarah didn't waste time with pleasantries. She walked straight to the main monitor, studied it for 30 seconds, then turned to Marcus's team. "Everyone under 30, step away from your keyboards. Now," Tommy Wu protested. "But we built this system. We know the code better than anyone." Sarah's response was swift. "You know the code, but you don't know systems. You don't know what happens when modern AI meets COBOL from 1985. You don't know what a 40-year-old database does when it receives requests it can't parse. Right now, your knowledge is dangerous." She divided the room. The young team would document everything they'd built, every decision, every shortcut. Meanwhile, her experts would perform what she called archaeological debugging, digging through layers of technological history to find where the present had collided with the past. Robert Thornton discovered the first major issue within an hour. "Your AI is too smart for its own good," he told Marcus. "It's pattern matching against historical data, but it doesn't understand that some of that data is garbage." It found shipping records from stores that closed in 2008 and decided they must be secret facilities. No one taught it about business closures, bankruptcies, or that addresses get reused. Maria Santos found the second issue. You have no circuit breakers. When one process fails, it triggers optimization in another, which triggers another. It's a cascade effect. We dealt with this exact problem at Target in '94, 2003, and 2009. It's literally textbook. "What textbook did your team use?" Marcus's lead developer answered sheepishly. "We didn't use textbooks. We used Medium articles and Stack Overflow." Sarah's team worked with a precision that was beautiful and horrifying to watch. They didn't panic. They didn't rush. When Walmart called threatening legal action, Sarah took the call herself, speaking to Jim Patterson in a language Marcus didn't even fully understand, the language of someone who'd been in the trenches. "Jim, it's Sarah Mitchell." "Yes, Sarah, I'm running recovery now. We'll have partial restoration in 4 hours, full system stability in 12. How do I know?" "Because I handled the 2011 situation at your Memphis hub. Remember that? Same problem, different decade. By noon, they'd stabilized the bleeding. Trucks were being rerouted to actual destinations. The phantom stores were purged from the system, but the damage was mounting." Marcus watched the liability counter he'd had built tick upward. 50 million, 70 million, 90 million. During a brief break, Marcus found Sarah on the rooftop terrace drinking coffee from a paper cup. The San Francisco skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, but neither of them was looking at the view. "How did you know?" Marcus asked. "When I called, you knew exactly what was wrong." Sarah turned to him. "Because I've seen this before. Not this exact problem, but this type. Young teams building on old foundations they don't understand. It happens every few years. Some hotshot thinks they can reinvent the wheel without understanding why the wheel is round." "We tested everything," Marcus said defensively. "You tested what you knew to test, but experience teaches you to test what you don't know. To test for the impossible, the ridiculous, the edge cases that shouldn't exist but do." She paused. "Did you know Walmart still has some inventory codes from 1962? Your AI found those and tried to optimize routes for stores that existed before. Your parents were born." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. It wasn't just his pride, it was his entire worldview. "I thought experience was just accumulated mistakes. Old thinking." Sarah laughed, but not unkindly. Experience is accumulated mistakes. That's exactly what makes it valuable. Every gray hair on my head represents a problem I've solved, a disaster I've survived. You can't download that. You can't learn it from a boot camp. You earn it by failing, fixing, and remembering. By 3 p.m., Robert Thornton had identified 17 critical vulnerabilities that needed immediate patching. Each one was something that shouldn't happen, but did in the real world. Legacy date formats that read 2024 as 1924, inventory codes that contained hidden control characters, database fields that had been repurposed 3 times over 40 years, carrying ghost data like digital archaeology. The young Tech Vision team watched in awe as these outdated experts performed surgery on their beautiful modern system. It was like watching master craftsmen repair a spacecraft with hand tools. Every fix was precise, elegant, and born from decades of similar battles. But while Sarah's team was saving the technical infrastructure, Marcus was about to learn that the business damage was catastrophically worse than any code failure. If you're still watching, hit subscribe right now, because what happens next will change everything you think about success and failure. Drop a comment about the biggest professional mistake you've witnessed. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m., but by 3:45, Marcus could already hear the sharks circling. The boardroom at Sequoia Capital was nothing like Tech Vision's playful offices. This was old-school Silicon Valley power. Leather chairs, oil paintings of founders, and an atmosphere that could suffocate optimism. Marcus sat outside, watching through glass walls as board members arrived. These weren't his cheerleaders anymore. These were investors watching their money burn. Patricia Zhao, lead partner at Sequoia and Tech Vision's biggest investor, arrived first. She'd put in $80 million of the firm's money based on Marcus's promise of disrupting supply chain management. Behind her came Thomas Bradley from Andreessen Horowitz, $60 million invested. Then Kumar Patel from Founders Fund, $40 million. Each face was a study in controlled fury. Marcus entered the room at exactly 4 p.m., carrying a laptop and a single sheet of paper. The paper contained numbers that made him physically ill to read. Sarah Mitchell had insisted on accompanying him, and for once, Marcus was grateful for experience in the room. Patricia didn't wait for pleasantries. "Marcus, I've been taking calls all day. Walmart is demanding $200 million in damages. Amazon has terminated their contract with a penalty clause of $80 million. FedEx, Target, Best Buy, they're all lawyering up. Current exposure is $470 million. That's more than double our entire funding. Explain to me how this happened." Marcus opened his laptop, but before he could speak, Thomas Bradley interrupted. "Actually, don't explain the technical details. We've hired our own forensic team. They've been analyzing your architecture for the past 6 hours. Do you know what they found?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Marcus shook his head. "They found that every single critical failure point was a known vulnerability in system integration." "Known, Marcus. There are academic papers about these exact problems from the 1990s. MIT has a whole course on legacy system integration. But your team's average age is 26, and not one of them has ever worked on anything older than cloud-native architecture." Kumar Patel pulled out his phone and read from it. "I have here a text from Jim Patterson at Walmart. He says, and I quote, 'Tech Vision is what happens when children play with enterprise systems. We will pursue full damages and ensure every company in America knows what Chen's inexperience cost us.'" Marcus tried to interject. "We've stabilized the system. Sarah Mitchell's team has—" "Sarah Mitchell?" Patricia's eyebrows rose. "The same Sarah Mitchell who applied to Tech Vision 8 months ago? The one whose resume you threw away because she was too old? I know because she applied through our referral. We recommended her specifically because she'd handled integrations for half the Fortune 500. The room went silent. Marcus felt the weight of his decision crushing him. Patricia continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do you know what Sarah Mitchell would have cost you? $300,000 a year, maybe $400 with equity. Do you know what she's costing you now? $3 million for 1 week, plus the $470 million in damages that she might have prevented if she'd been here from the start." Thomas Bradley opened a folder. "We've done a complete audit of your hiring practices. 0 employees over 40, 12% over 30. You actively discriminated against experienced candidates. There are emails, Marcus. Emails where you called experienced engineers, digital dinosaurs, and innovation blockers. That's taken out of context. Is it? Kumar interrupted. Because I have a recording of your Stanford recruitment speech, where you said, quote, "Experience is just another word for being too slow to adapt. We don't hire yesterday's thinkers for tomorrow's problems." Sarah Mitchell, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "May I address the board?" Patricia nodded. Sarah stood, and despite being the oldest person in the room, she commanded it completely. "The technical problems are fixed. The system will be stable. But Marcus is facing a larger issue. Every client has lost trust. They don't trust a CEO who thought he could reshape global commerce with a team that's never seen a business cycle, never dealt with a Black Friday crash, never navigated a supply chain crisis." She turned to Marcus. "You built a Ferrari engine and put it in a car with no brakes, no airbags, and no rearview mirror. Your young team could make it go fast, but they couldn't make it safe. Safety comes from scars, from mistakes, from experience." Patricia Zhao stood up. "Marcus, the board has been discussing this all day. We have two options. Option 1, we declare bankruptcy. TechVision folds, investors lose everything, and you personally face lawsuits that will follow you for decades. Option 2, we accept a buyout offer." "A buyout?" Marcus was stunned. "From who?" "Logitech Systems. They're offering to buy TechVision's technology and client list for $120 million. It covers maybe 20% of investor money. Everyone takes a massive loss, but at least it's something." Marcus did the math quickly. His $2 billion paper net worth would become nothing. His 40% stake would be worthless. The stock options he'd promised his young team would be toilet paper. "There's a condition," Thomas added. "You step down immediately. Logitech specifically said they don't want you anywhere near the company. They're bringing in Margaret Chen, no relation, to run it. She's 58, spent 30 years at Oracle and SAP. She'll keep maybe 10 of your employees, the ones who show promise, and pair them with experienced mentors." Marcus felt his world collapsing. 2 years of work, destroyed. His reputation, shattered. His fortune, evaporated. All because he thought experience was worthless. But the true cost of Marcus's arrogance wouldn't be measured in dollars. It would be measured in the lives he'd destroyed along the way. That evening, Marcus had to face the hardest audience of all, his own employees, the brilliant kids he'd convinced to bet their futures on him. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in TechVision's main space, a converted warehouse with exposed beams and a rock-climbing wall that now seemed like a monument to excess. Word had already spread. Some employees were crying. Others sat in stunned silence. The ping-pong tables were abandoned, the beer taps untouched. Marcus looked out at 150 faces, most under 30, all staring at him with a mixture of hope and terror. These weren't just employees. They were kids who'd dropped out of PhD programs, turned down Google offers, convinced their parents to let them join a startup. They'd believed in him. Tommy Wu stood up before Marcus could speak. "Is it true? Are we shutting down?" Marcus's throat felt like sandpaper. "Logitech is acquiring our technology. The company will continue, but not as TechVision. Not with most of us." The room erupted. Priya Patel, who'd been so confident presenting to investors just weeks ago, shouted, "What about our options? You said we'd all be millionaires by year 3. "The options?" Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. How do you tell someone their dreams are worthless? Jake, the 24-year-old hiring manager, was doing math on his phone. "I have 50,000 options at a strike price of $10. You said they'd be worth at least 100 each. That's $5 million. That's what I told my fiancé. We put a down payment on a house based on that." More voices joined in. Stories of wedding plans made on future wealth, parents who'd remortgaged homes to support their kids' dreams, student loans taken out with the promise of easy repayment once the options vested. Sarah Mitchell, who'd stayed to help with the transition, watched from the back of the room. She'd seen this before, the human wreckage of startup failure. But this was worse because these kids had no backup plans. Marcus had hired them, precisely because they were young enough to believe anything was possible. "I turned down Microsoft for this," someone shouted. "They offered me $200,000 a year, but you said that was selling out to the old guard." Marcus tried to explain the acquisition terms, but the math was brutal. After debt, legal fees, and investor preferences, common stock options were worth zero. The employees who'd worked 18-hour days for below-market salaries plus equity had effectively worked for free. That's when Danny Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, stood up. Danny was 22, hired straight from MIT, and he'd been the youngest person on the team. His voice shook as he spoke. "My dad didn't want me to take this job. He's an engineer at Boeing, been there 25 years. He said I should get experience at a real company first. But I told him he didn't understand the new economy. I said, you told us that experience was fear disguised as wisdom." Danny paused, tears streaming down his face. He was right, wasn't he? And now I have nothing. No job, no money, and a resume that says I worked at a company that lost $800 million. The number hit the room like a bomb. 800 million. That was the final tally. 470 in direct damages, 200 in contract cancellations, 130 in legal fees, and emergency consultants. Marcus wanted to disappear. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These were people who'd trusted him, followed him, believed in his vision that youth could conquer all. An older voice spoke from the back. It was Robert Thornton, the architect Sarah had brought in. "Can I share something with all of you?" The room turned to look at him. This 62-year-old man in khakis and a polo shirt, so out of place among the hoodies and sneakers. 30 years ago, I was Danny's age. I worked at a startup that was going to revolutionize telecommunications. We were young, brilliant, and absolutely certain we were smarter than AT&T and Bell Labs. We raised $50 million, huge money in 1994. We crashed and burned in 18 months. He walked forward, commanding attention despite his soft voice. I thought my career was over, but you know what? It was the beginning. Because failure plus reflection equals experience. Every one of you has just gained something invaluable. You've seen what doesn't work. That's worth more than any MBA. But we're unemployable now, Priya protested. Who's going to hire someone from Tech Vision? Robert smiled sadly. Everyone, if you're smart about it. You didn't fail because you're bad engineers. You failed because you were poorly led. There's a difference. Logitech is keeping 10 people. Oracle is actively recruiting from Tech Vision. They want young talent that's been humbled. Amazon too. But here's the catch. They're pairing you with experienced mentors. They're doing what should have been done here from the start. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward. I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close. The key is to learn the right lesson. The lesson isn't that innovation is bad or that youth has no value. The lesson is that wisdom and energy need each other. Experience and innovation are dance partners, not enemies. As the meeting dissolved into smaller groups, Marcus stood alone at the front of the room. His employees, former employees, avoided eye contact as they filed out. Some were already on their phones calling parents, partners, anyone who would listen to their disaster story. Tommy Wu was one of the last to leave. He stopped next to Marcus. You know what hurts the most. It's not the money. It's that we believed you when you said we were special, that we could skip the line, ignore the rules, build the future without understanding the past. As the lights went out in Tech Vision's offices for one of the last times, Marcus was left alone with the ghosts of his arrogance and a truth he couldn't escape. If this story is hitting you hard, like this video and share it with every entrepreneur you know. Comment below. What's the most important lesson experience has taught you that youth couldn't see? 3 weeks after the acquisition, Marcus sat in a small coffee shop in Menlo Park, waiting for someone he never thought he'd need to meet. The man who walked through the door was 73 years old, wearing a simple cardigan and comfortable shoes. His name was William Foster, and he'd built and sold 4 companies over 45 years. More importantly, he'd failed at 3 others. Patricia Zhao had arranged this meeting, calling it necessary therapy. William ordered black coffee and sat down across from Marcus, studying him with eyes that had seen every type of Silicon Valley rise and fall. Patricia tells me you lost $800 million. Because you thought experience was expensive, William said without preamble. I lost $300 million in 1987 because I thought experience was enough. Want to compare notes? Marcus looked up, surprised. You failed? Oh, spectacularly. I was 45, had 2 successful exits, thought I knew everything. Hired only veterans, ignored every young voice in the room. We built a perfect product for a market that had already moved on. The kids were trying to tell me about this new thing called the internet, but what did 25-year-olds know about business? William pulled out an old photograph from his wallet, a team photo from that failed company. See this kid? 23 years old, begged me to pivot to web-based services. I fired him for being too pushy. His name was Mark Andreessen. He went on to create Netscape. I went on to bankruptcy. The parallel hit Marcus like a punch. He'd made the opposite mistake, but with the same arrogance. The real tragedy, William continued, isn't your financial loss. It's the talent you wasted. Sarah Mitchell tells me you had some genuinely brilliant young minds. With proper mentorship, they could have been extraordinary. Instead, you threw them into the deep end with no life preservers. Marcus's phone buzzed. Another lawsuit notification. The legal aftermath was growing. 3 of his employees were suing for misrepresentation about stock options. Walmart's lawyers were pursuing personal liability claims. His own investors were exploring whether his hiring practices constituted negligence. How do you recover from something like this? Marcus asked. William sipped his coffee thoughtfully. You don't recover, you rebuild. But first, you have to understand what you really lost. It wasn't $800 million. It was trust. Your investors' trust, your employees' trust, the market's trust, and most importantly, your trust in your own judgment. They sat in silence. For a moment, watching Stanford students walk by outside, probably dreaming of their own startups. Let me tell you about Logitech's CEO, Margaret Chen, William said. She started as a junior programmer at Oracle in 1989. Took her 15 years to make senior manager, another 10 to reach VP. She's been passed over for CEO 3 times for being too conservative. Now she's taking over your company, and she'll make it work. You know why? Marcus shook his head. Because she's spent 35 years learning what breaks systems and what makes them resilient. She's seen every economic cycle, every tech boom and bust. She knows that the best code in the world is useless if it can't handle Tuesday. Handle Tuesday? William smiled grimly. That's an old engineering joke. Anyone can build a system that works in theory, on a perfect day, with clean data. But Tuesday? Tuesday is when everything goes wrong. Tuesday is legacy systems and dirty data and impossible edge cases. Margaret Chen has survived 1,000 Tuesdays. Your team hadn't even seen one. Marcus's phone rang. It was his lawyer. More bad news. The acquisition terms were being revised. Logitech had found more liabilities during due diligence. The purchase price was dropping to $80 million. After everything was paid, investors would get back maybe 10 cents on the dollar. After the call, Marcus looked broken. I destroyed everything. My employees hate me. My investors are suing me. My reputation is trash. I'm 32 years old and I'm finished. William leaned forward. You're 32 and you're educated. There's a difference. I know a venture capitalist who lost $1 billion in the dot-com crash. Now he only invests in companies with mixed-age teams. I know a CEO who bankrupted his first company at 28 by ignoring advisors. Now he runs a Fortune 500 company with the most diverse leadership team in tech. Diverse in age, experience, and background. They'd hire me after this? Not today. Maybe not for 5 years. But if you learn the right lessons, if you become genuinely humble about what experience means, if you can teach others to avoid your mistakes, then you become valuable again. Not as a boy genius, but as someone who understands the true cost of arrogance. William stood to leave, but turned back. One more thing. Sarah Mitchell is starting a consulting firm focused on helping young startups integrate with enterprise systems. She needs someone who understands modern AI but respects legacy infrastructure. Someone who's learned the hard way that tomorrow and yesterday need to work together. Interested? Marcus stared at him. She'd work with me? After everything? She said, and I quote, "The kid learned an $800 million lesson. That's an expensive education. Might as well put it to use." As William left, Marcus sat alone with his cold coffee and warm shame. Through the, window he could see the building where TechVision's offices had been. Already the signs were being changed to Logitech systems. Margaret Chen had kept 15 of his original employees, but paired each one with a senior mentor. The ping-pong tables were gone, replaced with proper training rooms. His phone buzzed with a text from Danny Chen, the 22-year-old who'd defied his father to join TechVision. Got hired at Boeing, my dad's team, starting at the bottom, but he says, oh, that's where you learn the foundation. Thanks for the expensive lesson, Marcus. Hope you learned it too. Marcus would spend the next 6 months in legal proceedings, watching the full consequences of his arrogance unfold in courtrooms and conference rooms, each revelation worse than the last. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a federal courtroom in San Francisco, about to testify in the largest startup negligence case in Silicon Valley history. The courtroom was packed with press, investors, former employees, and curious entrepreneurs who wanted to see how far a golden boy could fall. Marcus wore his last good suit, the others having been sold to pay legal fees. His net worth had gone from $2 billion on paper to negative $3 million in debt. The lead plaintiff's attorney, Rebecca Harrison, was 61 years old with 40 years of corporate litigation experience, exactly the kind of person Marcus would have dismissed a year ago. Now she was about to dissect every decision he'd made. "Mr. Chen," she began, holding up a printed email. "On March 15, 2023, you wrote to your leadership team, 'Gray hair equals gray thinking. We need builders, not advisors.' Do you recall writing this?" Marcus's lawyer had coached him to answer simply, "Yes." And when James Morrison, a 58-year-old systems architect with 30 years at Microsoft, offered to consult for free during your beta testing, you responded, "Thanks, but we don't. Need help from someone who probably still uses Internet Explorer." Correct? The courtroom rustled. Several jury members, many over 40 themselves, shifted uncomfortably. That was taken out of context. "It's a yes or no question, Mr. Chen." "Yes," Rebecca Harrison continued methodically, presenting evidence that painted a damning picture. Email after email showing Marcus rejecting experienced candidates. Video clips from his university talks mocking traditional expertise. Slack. Messages where he called veteran engineers digital fossils. Then came the devastating part, the human cost. Rebecca called witness after witness, former employees who'd lost life savings, parents who'd remortgaged homes, a young couple who'd delayed having children because they were counting on stock options to provide financial security. The most painful testimony came from Jennifer Walsh, a 28-year-old data scientist who'd joined TechVision after Marcus personally recruited her from Google. "He said we were building the future," Jennifer testified, her voice steady but her eyes wet. "He said experience was baggage, that fresh eyes saw solutions veterans couldn't. I believed him. I convinced my husband to let me take a 70% pay cut for equity. We sold our condo, moved into a rental, lived on ramen for 18 months. For nothing." When Marcus finally took the stand for his own testimony, his lawyer tried to salvage something. "Mr. Chen, did you deliberately intend to cause harm?" "No," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "I believed we were innovating. I believed we were disrupting outdated thinking. And what do you believe now?" Marcus looked at the gallery, seeing faces of people whose lives he'd impacted. Sarah Mitchell was there, observing quietly. Robert Thornton. Even William Foster had come. "I believe," Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully, "I believe I confused arrogance with confidence. I thought experience was just accumulated time, not accumulated wisdom. I now understand that every senior engineer I dismissed, every gray-haired consultant I mocked, they had something I desperately needed. They'd seen what I hadn't even imagined could go wrong." Rebecca Harrison stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Chen, you're only saying this because you lost, aren't you? If TechVision had succeeded, you'd still be preaching that experience is worthless." It was the question Marcus had asked himself every night for 6 months. "Maybe," he admitted. "Success would have reinforced my biases. But that's exactly the point, isn't it? Experience teaches you that success can be more dangerous than failure because it makes you stop questioning yourself." "How poetic," Rebecca said dryly. "Tell that to the 150 young people whose careers you derailed. Tell that to Walmart's employees whose bonuses were cut because of your company's failures. Tell that to the truck drivers who spent days lost because your brilliant AI didn't know the difference between active and closed stores." The list of damages was staggering. Beyond the $800 million in direct losses, there were secondary impacts. 3 small logistics companies that had signed with TechVision went bankrupt when the system failed. Walmart had to lay off 200 warehouse workers due to the efficiency losses. The ripple effects touched thousands of lives. During a recess, Marcus found himself in the hallway with Sarah Mitchell. She'd been called as an expert witness, explaining how the failures could have been prevented with proper experience on the team. "Do you regret helping me?" Marcus asked her. Sarah considered the question. "No, but I regret that it took a disaster for you to value what I offered. You know what's ironic? Your young team actually had brilliant ideas. Tommy Wu's algorithm for predictive routing was genius. Priya's interface design was revolutionary. With proper guidance, they could have changed the industry. Instead, I let them crash into walls that had been mapped decades ago." Exactly. Every field has its mapped walls, the failures that teach boundaries. Medicine has them, aviation has them, engineering has them. Experience is just knowing where those walls are so innovation can flow around them, not through them. Back in the courtroom, the final witnesses were called. Jim Patterson from Walmart testified. Via video link, his words cutting. "Tech vision represents everything wrong with Silicon Valley's youth obsession. They think disruption means ignoring hard-won lessons. Real disruption respects what came before while building what comes next." The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. The verdict. Tech Vision and Marcus personally were liable for gross negligence. The damages, $420 million to be paid to various plaintiffs. Since Tech Vision was already dissolved, most of that fell on the investor's insurance. But Marcus was personally liable for $12 million. Money he didn't have and wouldn't have for decades. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus's lawyer handed him bankruptcy paperwork. At 32, he was financially ruined, professionally destroyed, and legally obligated to pay damages that would follow him for 20 years. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. "Marcus, what's next for you? Do you blame your team? Was experience really too expensive?" Marcus stopped at that last question. He turned to the cameras knowing this would be his last moment in the spotlight for a long time. Experience wasn't expensive. Ignorance was. Experience would have cost me maybe $5 million in senior salaries. Ignorance cost $800 million in losses, 150 careers, and immeasurable trust. To any young entrepreneur watching, hire people who've failed before you. They've already paid for lessons you can't afford to learn yourself. As Marcus walked away from the courthouse unemployed and bankrupt, he didn't know that his story was about to become Silicon Valley's most studied case of what happens when brilliance meets arrogance without wisdom. This is hitting different, isn't it? Share this story with every startup founder you know. Comment below. Should experience be valued more than innovation? Let's discuss this crucial balance. 2 years after the trial, Marcus was living in a studio apartment in Oakland, working a job that would have horrified his former self. Every morning at 5 a.m., Marcus caught the BART train to San Francisco, not to gleaming tech offices but to a small consulting firm in a building that hadn't been renovated since the 1990s. Mitchell Advisory Services occupied just 2 floors, with actual filing cabinets and a coffee maker from 2003. Sarah Mitchell had kept her word and hired him, but not as a consultant. Marcus Chen, former billionaire on paper, was now a junior analyst making $65,000 a year. His desk was in the back corner, surrounded by people he once would have dismissed as corporate refugees. There was Bob, 64, who'd debugged systems before Marcus was born. Linda, 57, who'd survived 5 company acquisitions. Trevor, 49, who still wrote notes by hand because paper doesn't crash. Marcus's job was humbling by design. He documented system requirements, sat in on client calls taking notes, and created reports that Sarah would review with a red pen like he was in high school. The clients never knew who he was. Sarah had given him the option to use a different name, but Marcus chose to own his shame. One Tuesday morning, Sarah called him into her office. The walls were covered not with trendy startup posters but with network diagrams dating back decades, each one annotated with lessons learned. "We have a problem, client," she said. Brightstart Technologies' 3 founders, all 26, raised $40 million, building an AI platform for healthcare. Sound familiar? Marcus felt his stomach turn. Very. They're 6 months from disaster. Their AI is making treatment recommendations based on patterns it's finding in data, but it doesn't understand that correlation isn't causation. It suggested treating diabetes with a drug that just happened to be prescribed to many diabetic patients for unrelated depression. No. One on their team has medical experience. They turned down 6 expert advisors for being too traditional. "What do you want me to do?" Sarah leaned back. I want you to save them from becoming you. The meeting with Brightstart was scheduled for that afternoon. Marcus prepared meticulously, knowing this was his chance to prevent another tragedy. When the three founders walked in, Kyle, Jessica, and Ahmad, all brilliant, all young, all radiating the same confidence Marcus once had, he saw himself reflected in their eyes. Kyle, the CEO, opened dismissively. "Sarah, no offense, but we were expecting senior consultants, not—" He gestured at Marcus, clearly seeing just another junior analyst. Sarah smiled. "Kyle, meet Marcus Chen." The recognition was instant. Kyle's confidence evaporated. "The tech vision Marcus Chen?" $800 million mistake Marcus Chen. Marcus corrected. "And I'm here to make sure you don't beat my record." For the next 3 hours, Marcus laid out their future with surgical precision. Every shortcut they'd taken, every expert they'd dismissed, every edge case they'd ignored, he showed them where each path led. He pulled up actuarial tables, FDA violation precedents, malpractice lawsuit settlements. "Your algorithm found a pattern," Marcus explained. "Diabetics often have depression. The depression medication prescription coincided with improved outcomes not because the drug helped diabetes but because treating depression made patients more likely to manage their diabetes properly. An experienced medical professional would have spotted this instantly. Your brilliant AI just recommended off-label use that could kill people." Jessica, the CTO, was defensive. "Our algorithm is more sophisticated than TechVision's. We have better training data." Marcus pulled up a slide he'd prepared. TechVision's algorithm was perfect too, until it met reality. "Let me show you something." He displayed a photo from a medical journal. "This is Dr. Emily Rodriguez, 62 years old, head of endocrinology at Stanford Medical. She applied to be your advisory board. You rejected her for being too academic. She's published 300 papers on exactly the kind of correlation errors your AI is making." Ahmad, the quietest founder, finally spoke. "How much would it cost to bring in experienced advisors?" "About $2 million a year for a proper advisory board," Sarah said. "Plus, another $3 million for senior hires who've shipped medical software before." Kyle laughed bitterly. $5 million? That's insane. That's 50 junior developers. Marcus stood up, walked to the whiteboard, and wrote a number. $12,000. That's the largest medical malpractice settlement in history. Theranos was just lying about blood tests. You're about to have an AI prescribe treatments. When, not if, when, someone dies following your AI's recommendation, that number is your future. The room went cold. Marcus continued. $5 million for experience or $12 billion for ignorance. That's the real math. Over the following weeks, Marcus worked with Brightstart to restructure their entire approach. They hired Dr. Rodriguez and 5 other medical professionals. They brought in 2 veterans from the FDA approval process. The young founders were resistant at first, but Marcus had something Sarah Mitchell hadn't had when she'd tried to warn him. The credibility of spectacular failure. During one late evening session, Kyle asked Marcus, "Do you hate us? Young founders who think we know everything?" Marcus thought carefully. "No, I envy you. You get to learn the easy way what I learned the hard way. Every gray-haired advisor you hire is a $1 million mistake you won't make. Every experienced hire is a lawsuit you'll avoid. You think you're paying for their past, but you're actually buying your future." 6 months later, Brightstart's revised product passed FDA preliminary review. Their advisors had caught 14 potentially fatal edge cases. Dr. Rodriguez's input had transformed their correlation engine into something that actually understood causation. They were on track to help millions of patients safely. Sarah called Marcus into her office after the Brightstart success. "You saved them about $300 million in potential lawsuits. More importantly, you might have saved actual lives." "It doesn't make up for what I destroyed," Marcus said. "No, it doesn't. But it's a start. I have 12 more young startups that need intervention. You're going to be my translator, someone who speaks both languages, young ambition and old wisdom." That night, Marcus received an unexpected email that would finally close the circle of his painful journey toward understanding the true value of experience. The email was from Margaret Chen, the CEO who'd taken over TechVision's remains. And her message was just 4 words. "We need to talk." Marcus met Margaret at the old TechVision offices, now transformed into Logitech's Innovation Center. The ping-pong tables were gone, but in their place were collaboration spaces where young engineers worked alongside senior mentors. The rock-climbing wall had been converted into a training facility. It was professional but not soulless, innovative but not reckless. Margaret Chen was everything Marcus hadn't valued before. 58, patient, methodical, with gray streaks in her hair that she wore like medals of honor. She'd turned the disaster of tech vision into a profitable division in just 2 years. "I wanted you to see what we built from your wreckage," she said, leading him through the offices. 15 of your original employees still work here. Want to know why they succeeded this time? They stopped at a workstation where Tommy Wu, Marcus's former lead engineer, was working. But he wasn't. Alone. Next to him sat a man in his 60s reviewing code together. "Tommy's still brilliant," Margaret explained, "but now he's paired with Stan, who's been writing code since 1979. Tommy brings innovation, Stan brings wisdom. Together they've solved problems neither could handle alone." They walked past more pairs, more teams, young energy guided by experienced hands, fresh ideas tempered by hard-won knowledge. It was what tech vision could have been. "Why did you want me to see this?" Marcus asked. Margaret handed him a report. "Because your disaster became Silicon Valley's most important teachable moment. This is a Stanford Business School case study. The $800 million assumption, how tech vision's ageism destroyed value. It's required reading in every entrepreneurship program now." Marcus flipped through the pages, seeing his emails, his quotes, his decisions dissected and analyzed. It was brutal, but fair. "There's more," Margaret continued. "We're launching a new product. It's based on your original NexusFlow concept, but rebuilt properly. We fixed every flaw, addressed every edge case, integrated with every legacy system. It's going to revolutionize supply chain management just like you envisioned." "That's good," Marcus managed, though it hurt to see his dream realized by someone else. "The board wants to do something unusual," Margaret said. "They want to put your name on it, not as celebration, but as a warning. The Chen Protocol, our internal name for the systematic review process where every innovation must be vetted by someone with at least 10 years' experience in the affected domain." Marcus didn't know whether to be honored or humiliated. His name would live on, but as a cautionary tale. "There's one more thing," Margaret added. "The young employees you hired, the ones who stayed, they wanted me to give you this." She handed him a small plaque. It read, "Thank you for the most. Expensive education money can't buy. The Tech Vision survivors." Below were 15 signatures, including Tommy Wu and Priya Patel. Later that evening, Marcus attended a dinner Margaret had arranged. Around the table sat an unlikely group: Sarah Mitchell, Robert Thornton, William Foster, and 5 of the original Tech Vision employees who'd stayed with Logitech. Tommy Wu raised a glass. 2 years ago I thought Marcus had ruined my life. Stock options worthless, reputation damaged, dreams crushed. But you know what? I learned more from that failure than I would have from a decade of success." Priya added, "We were brilliant idiots. We could code anything but understand nothing. Now I run a team at Logitech, but my co-lead is 55. Yesterday she stopped me from making a decision that would have cost us millions. She'd seen the same pattern in 1998. Robert Thornton, the architect who'd helped save Tech Vision during the crisis, shared his perspective. "I've worked with hundreds of young engineers. The Tech Vision kids were special, not because they were smarter, but because they learned humility the hard way. Those who survived are now the best engineers I know. Innovative but careful, ambitious but respectful." Sarah Mitchell stood to speak. "Marcus, you asked me once why I helped you. The truth? Because I saw myself in you. Not the arrogance. I was never that bold. But the belief that one way was the only way. When I was young, I thought experience was everything and innovation was reckless. I missed opportunities because I was too careful. You missed safeguards because you were too reckless. Both extremes are wrong." William Foster, the eldest at the table, concluded, "The tech industry swings between extremes, worshipping youth, then experience, then youth again. The truth is boring. You need both. Always have, always will." Marcus learned this at a cost of $800 million. Most never learn it at all. As dinner ended, Margaret pulled Marcus aside. "I'm starting a new initiative. Every Logitech product team must have age diversity. No team can be more than 60% any age bracket. We're calling it the Balance Protocol. I want you to help design it. I'm not qualified to— You're the most qualified person in Silicon Valley, Margaret interrupted. You've been on both sides of the mistake. You've seen what happens when arrogance meets ignorance. You've experienced the cost of dismissing experience. Who better to teach balance? Marcus took the train back to Oakland that night, his mind reeling. He was still bankrupt, still had 11 million in damages hanging over him, still worked as a junior analyst. But something had shifted. His failure had become data. His mistake had become a lesson. His arrogance had become awareness. He pulled out his laptop and began writing. Not code, not a business plan, but a letter to his younger self. A letter that would eventually become an article, then a book, then a movement. The Wisdom Tax. Why experience is the cheapest investment you'll ever make. The letter began with a simple line. Dear Marcus, the gray hair you mocked could have saved you $800 million. Here's why you should have listened. If you're learning from this story, hit that like button right now and subscribe for more real-life lessons. Comment below. What's the most valuable advice an experienced person gave you that you initially dismissed? The auditorium was the same one where he'd recruited for Tech Vision 7 years earlier, preaching the gospel of youth over experience. The recording of that old speech had become infamous, played in business schools as an example of dangerous thinking. Now he was back, invited by Professor David Kim, ironically, his former head of customer success who'd left tech to teach after the trauma. Marcus looked different now, 37 years old, some gray in his own hair from stress, wearing a simple button-down instead of designer suits he could no longer afford. He still owed $7 million in damages, though payment plans made it manageable. He still worked at Mitchell Advisory, though he'd been promoted to senior consultant. His salary was $150,000, comfortable, but not extravagant. 7 years ago, Marcus began, I stood on this stage and told you that experience was worthless, that fresh thinking was, everything, that you could skip the line, ignore the veterans, and build tomorrow without understanding yesterday. Many of you have seen what that philosophy cost. $800 million, 150 careers, and immeasurable trust. He clicked to his first slide, a photo of the original Tech Vision team, young faces glowing with confidence. But today, I want to tell you what that disaster created. The next slide showed those same people today. Tommy Wu, now chief technology officer at a healthcare startup, standing next to his 60-year-old mentor. Priya Patel, running her own company with a deliberately diverse age range. Danny Chen, the youngest victim, now a senior engineer at Boeing, working alongside his father. Every person in this photo learned something worth more than the millions they lost. Humility. They learned that innovation without wisdom is just expensive failure with good marketing. A student raised her hand. But Mr. Chen, aren't you just saying this because you failed? If Tech Vision had worked, wouldn't you still believe youth is superior? Marcus had expected this question. You're absolutely right. Success would have confirmed my biases. I would have become even more dangerous, making bigger bets with bigger consequences. Failure was my education. The $800 million, that was my tuition. He showed a new slide. Current Silicon Valley statistics. Since Tech Vision's collapse, venture capital funding for startups with age-diverse teams has increased 400%. Companies with at least 30% of employees over 40 are 60% less likely to fail in the first 3 years. This isn't because experience prevents innovation, it's because experience prevents predictable disasters. Another student asked, but doesn't experience make people resistant to change? Bad experience does, Marcus replied. But good experience teaches you which changes matter and which are just noise. Let me show you something. He pulled up a photo of Sarah Mitchell, now 71, still running her consulting firm. This woman has adapted to every technology shift since the 1980s. Mainframes to PCs to internet to cloud to AI. She's not stuck in the past. She's surfed every wave of the future. But she also knows that some problems are eternal. Systems integration, data quality, human error. These don't go away just because technology improves. Marcus then shared stories from his current work. In the past 5 years at Mitchell Advisory, he'd helped prevent dozens of potential tech visions. Young founders who thought they could ignore regulations. brilliant engineers who didn't understand business cycles, innovative designers who'd never seen a market crash. My job now is translation, he explained. I translate between the ambition of youth and the wisdom of experience. I help 20-somethings understand why 60-somethings are valuable. I help 60-somethings understand why 20-somethings are essential. Because the truth no one wants to admit is this: we need each other. He showed his final slide. A simple equation. Innovation plus experience. Sustainable success. Remove either variable, and you get disaster. Too much innovation without experience? You get tech vision. Too much experience without innovation? You get Kodak, Blockbuster, BlackBerry. Professor Kim joined him on stage. For the Q&A, a student asked, "What happened to all the money you were supposed to make?" Marcus laughed, surprising himself with how little it hurt now. On paper, I was worth $2 billion. In reality, I'm worth -$7 million. But you know what? I'm richer now. I have something I didn't have before. Perspective. I know what things actually cost, not just their price. Do you regret starting Tech Vision? Another student asked. No. I regret how I built it. The idea was good. AI-powered supply chain management is transforming the industry. Logitech's version of our product, built properly with experienced oversight, is saving companies millions. But I regret the arrogance. I regret dismissing wisdom. I regret thinking I was smarter than decades of accumulated knowledge. As the session ended, a young woman approached him. She looked familiar. "Mr. Chen, I'm Jennifer Walsh's daughter, Emma. My mom was one of your employees who lost everything." Marcus tensed, expecting anger. "My mom wanted me to give you this," Emma said, handing him an envelope. Inside was a photo of Jennifer at her new job at Oracle, standing with her team, smiling. The note read, "Marcus, the stock options were worthless, but the lesson was priceless. I now lead a team of 12, half under 30, half over 50. We've shipped 3 successful products. Your failure taught me to value wisdom. I wanted you to know. I'm okay. We're all okay. And we're better. Because we survived Tech Vision. Jennifer." Marcus stood in the parking lot afterward, looking at the Stanford campus where his journey had begun. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Mitchell. "Saw the recording of your speech. You're ready." "Ready for what?" He typed back. "To teach the next generation properly this time. I'm retiring next year. I want you to take over Mitchell Advisory, but only if you promise to hire both brilliant kids and experienced veterans." Marcus stared at the message. Sarah's company wasn't glamorous, it wasn't going to make him billions, but it was profitable, stable, and most importantly, it prevented disasters rather than creating them. That evening, Marcus had dinner with his parents, who'd watched their son rise and fall from a distance. His father, an engineer himself with 40 years at Intel, finally said what he'd held back for years. "When you started Tech Vision, you told me I didn't understand the new economy. That my experience was outdated. It broke my heart, not because you were wrong about technology, but because you were wrong about wisdom. Every gray hair on my head represents a problem solved, a mistake survived. You saw them as signs of obsolescence. They were actually medals of honor." His mother added, "But you know what? You earned your own gray hairs now, and you earned them the hard way." As Marcus drove back to his small apartment in Oakland, he passed a billboard advertising a new startup accelerator. Young founders, experienced advisors building tomorrow with yesterday's wisdom. The tagline at the bottom read, "Don't be the next Tech Vision." His story had become Silicon Valley's favorite cautionary tale, told in boardrooms and classrooms, a permanent reminder of what happens when brilliance dismisses experience. The $800 million mistake that taught an entire industry a simple truth. Wisdom and innovation aren't competitors. They're partners. Marcus Chen never became a billionaire. He never made the Forbes list again. He never built a unicorn company. But he did something more valuable. He became the bridge between generations, the translator between ambition and wisdom, the living reminder that experience isn't expensive. Ignorance is. Today, Marcus runs Mitchell Advisory Services, renamed Balance Partners. Every client contract includes a mandatory clause. All project teams must include both members under 30 and over 50. He still owes $4 million in damages, paying it off slowly but steadily. His business card reads simply, "Marcus Chen, learning from yesterday, building for tomorrow. And in every presentation he gives, in every consultation he provides, in every disaster he helps prevent, he shares the lesson that cost him everything to learn. The arrogance of youth and the wisdom of experience aren't enemies. They're dance partners, and the music only plays when both are on the floor. The boy who thought inexperience was cheap had finally become the man who knew that wisdom was priceless. His $800 million education was complete, and now he was teaching others to learn the easy way what he'd learned the hardest way possible.